What's up, guys? My name is Zach, and today I am driving a 1993 Buick Century Wagon. Up front is a 3.3-liter V6, and down below is a 4-speed automatic transmission. Now, I am super excited to be driving this Buick Century Wagon for two reasons. First of all, I haven't driven many Buick Centuries here on the channel, haven't driven many Buicks here on the channel, and so I'm trying to fix that today. But the second reason is the fact that this is the Wagon, a dying breed of automobile, although Buick was one of the last ones to offer an American wagon here in the States with the Regal. But I'm just excited to share this little piece of history with you today. But if you would like to share your little piece of history, you could submit it to my website, zackbradle.com/submit. Quick and easy submission form. I come out to you, and you would get a video of your car, just like the one you're watching now of this Buick Century Wagon. But let's get back to that 3.3-liter under the hood. Well, it makes about 160 horsepower, which isn't anything crazy, but it definitely has a healthy amount of torque for getting around town. That's what I really love about the Century. It doesn't seem bothered by day-to-day driving because it has that bigger engine than any 4-cylinder. Now, in this model year, they actually switched it to the 3100 3.1-liter that they carried on through into the 2000s. Now, like I said, paired to it is a 4-speed automatic that is with overdrive, and it's fine. It's doing the job. Nothing really to write home about. Last but not least, of course, the Century is front-wheel drive. So how does it feel to actually drive the Buick Century Wagon? Well, it is big and it is floaty. Now, it is far from the biggest Buick offered. I'll give you that. But it floats over bumps, pretty much anything in the road. It is unbothered, it is unbiased, and I love that. It's so cushy and comfy. This is what I expect out of Buick, and I'm so glad to get that here in the Century. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have all rectangular gauges. Off to the left is my fuel and battery voltage. Off to the right is my gear position and temperature. And then in the center, I do get my speedometer. Again, everything is horizontal and rectangular. On the steering wheel, I don't get any forward-facing buttons besides the horns, which, listen up, it sounds like a 90s sitcom. I'm walking here. Overall, I love the look and feel of the steering wheel. Very 90s. And I do actually get an airbag, which is nice. It's a supplemental inflatable restraint. Cool. Off to the left, I do have a vent as well as my interior lights and my headlights, all on very interesting switches. And moving on to the door, I do have manual mirrors. Interesting to see in a Buick. But then I have power windows and power locks. I love that little wood accent they put around it. Moving into the center, I get a climate control vent up above the radio, which does have a auto reversing tape deck, tune, balance, fade, a lot of niceties here for 1993, and I love to see that. Down below, I do have my climate control options, how fast I want it, where I want it, what temperature I want it at. That's it. Off to the right of all that, we do have our map light and rear defog on and off. Kind of interesting placement here, kind of juts out of the dash. And over to the far right, I have two more climate control vents that have their own on-off switch and this really nice Buick Century logo. Then I do get a big pull-out ashtray, of course, because this was the 90s and this is an American car. And then we don't get any center console. Moving up to the seats, we do get an armrest with cup holders. So we will do a big friggin' bottle test here in the Buick Century Wagon. And of course, much like the similar yeared Park Avenue Ultra that I recently drove, this does fail. I wasn't really expecting it to pass, but alas, that's still a fail of the big friggin' bottle test. However, the seats are very comfortable. This is, again, exactly what I expect out of Buick and what I miss out of Buick. This is a living room sofa that just so happened to be bolted into the chassis of a Buick Wagon, and I love that. This really reminds me, especially this sort of crushed blue velvet, really reminds me of my grandma's sofa growing up in the Midwest, and I'm sure many people feel the same way. However, speaking of seats, we do have back seats, so let's go do a back seat review. All right, so we're in the back of the Buick Century Wagon, and a couple of things to note. First of all, headroom great, and this headliner is on life support with about 1,000 different pins in it to keep it up. Very typical of GM in this era to have sagging headliners. Knee room is awful. Didn't think I was gonna say that, but knee room is pretty terrible. My knees are being smushed. They have to go on either side of the seat just to sit normally, and that's not what I particularly love seeing. Interestingly enough, I have an ashtray on the back of the passenger seat attached to the fabric seat. I can't imagine how many of these got burnt by someone trying to ash out, not paying attention, or hitting a bump. Kind of interesting there. I do have power windows back here. However, this isn't the only rear seating option that the Buick Century Wagon came with. Let's hop around back. All right, first of all, this is the era of 2 GM keys. Squares for the ignition, circle is for the body. But if you come up here, this unlocks the glass. So move it to the left and you can pull out just the glass, which I think is incredibly cool. Now, unfortunately, the struts have given up over time, but I love this feature on station wagons. And you can kind of look, the glass is curved, which is very, very interesting. But come back up here with the round key, move it to the right to open the gate, and then we're in the back of the Buick Century Wagon. Now, something to note, like I mentioned with the back seats, is that this actually does get a rear-facing third row. Now, it only gets lap belts. However, to my disappointment, you got to pull those and then fold this up. A previous owner actually removed the third row. So unfortunately, I can't test that for you, to much of the sadness of not only myself, but the owner, Dylan. He's not sure why the previous owner removed the seats. He assumes for the extra storage space, but you don't really get that much extra storage space. That's where your feet would go anyway. So this was empty as it was, so kind of weird. Anyway, it did come with an optional third row, which would then get you these rear venting windows. You can kind of see here, actually vent out like that. So that was for the third row occupants, so they didn't suffocate. So plenty of cool and special stuff in the back of the Buick Century Wagon. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and I really do love the more square body Buick Century. I've driven the rounded bubble Buick Century, but this is the square one. This is when cars were still big. However, we'll talk about with the final thoughts, this is kind of a weird crossover, but overall, I really like the styling of it, and there's just something sort of homey about it, you know, homely, I should say, where I feel at ease looking at this car, like it's an aunt or an uncle or a cousin that I see twice a year. That's how I feel about this generation of Buick Century. But let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving the 93 Buick Century? Well, I love this experience. It's been really, really good. The ride is cushy. The V6 has definitely enough power for me. Now, I'm not tearing up Great Lakes Dragway, but I'm also not impeding traffic. So, a nice middle ground. But what did I mean when I said that this is sort of a weird crossover year for the Buick Century? Well, cars in the 80s were undergoing a big change. This car, this generation of Buick Century, debuted in 1982 and ran until 1996. Over 14 years of production. Now, there were 2 facelifts thrown in there, but this car was built for 14 years straight. And contrary to what you might think, it actually didn't stop selling well. It sold decent in the 80s, but actually really hit its stride in the 90s after it had already been out for 10 years. This car was a response to GM, Buick, and the entire American car market downsizing after the 1970s. In 1973, we had an oil crisis here and across the world, and so there was a push for smaller, more economical, more affordable cars. So vehicles started getting smaller. Buick station wagons like this used to be about 160 feet long. This is actually considered a small wagon. But it's before Buick lost their way in the 2000s. This is one of the last wagons that they made. The real true last one was the Buick Roadmaster in 1996, until they briefly picked up wagon production for the Regal Tour X in the 2000s, but that's a different story. Big cushy wagons were Buick's staple since the 60s and 70s. And so this holds on to that heritage, but it's smaller. It is more economical. It has an updated V6, and the year after this got an even more updated 3.1 V6. This car changed with the times and really defined a generation. Someone born the year that this car debuted was in high school by the time they switched to the next generation. It sold incredibly well throughout its entire run. And to be fair, it's not really baffling why. This car is comfortable, it has pretty good features, and it still captures that old American essence in a time in the 90s where things were going small engines. Foreign-built cars were here and producing real competition. The Toyota Camry and Camry Wagon from this era put up a serious competition in terms of price and efficiency. But what they never ever touched on was Buick's comfort. And that is what makes this Buick Century so special. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Dylan for letting me take out his Buick Century. Such a cool automobile. I'm so glad I was able to bring it to you. Dylan has been absolutely awesome to work with. We've been filming a couple of his cars here today, and I can't wait to show you what else we have in store. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.